This is a Seiko dive watch. It's supposed to be very tough, supposed to be able to withstand punishment. So let's just see here.
All right. And
a crazy post-purchase moment happens to many people after they buy a dive watch. The dial says it's water resistant to 100 meters or 200 meters, and it's called a dive watch, yet when they read the instructions it says, not suitable for diving. What? What is going on? Some people say that anything with over 100 meters water resistance or more is a dive watch and you can just ignore those warnings. But of course, some people are wrong. This watch has 100 meters water resistance, but isn't for diving. This isn't considered a dive watch either, even though it looks like one. This is a dive watch, but you shouldn't dive with it, and it's not a diver. This isn't a diver either, even though it has 200 meters water resistance and has a marlin on it. This is a true dive watch, and you can dive with it, but it's not a diver. And this famous watch isn't a diver either, but it is a dive watch, and you can dive with it. Today, I'm discussing dive watches. What is a dive watch anyway? And a related question, if my watch says it's water resistant to 50 meters, why can't I snorkel with it? That coming up next. Dive watch is essentially a meaningless term. Any manufacturer who wants to call their watch a dive watch can do that. Usually, if a watch has a beefy-looking case, 100 meters water resistance or more, a rotating bezel, and doesn't look too fancy, people will call it a dive watch. Then there's a certified dive watch that must meet certain standards to call itself certified. If your watch meets all these specifications, it's a real dive watch. However, even if it doesn't meet all those specifications, it can still be a dive watch. We're going to look at what makes a watch a diver and why some of the best dive watches don't bother to have it. The first wristwatch patented for commercial dive use was the 1932 Omega Marine, an Art Deco style watch worn by famous early adventurer and ocean explorer Dr. Charles William Beebe. Its case was sealed with cork like a wine bottle, and it was initially rated to a depth of 73 meters. It was later tested to 135 meters, as well as the ability to withstand shock, temperature variations, and magnetism. This was the beginning of modern dive watch testing. Today, the International Standard for Organization, or ISO, has a list of features a watch must have and trials a watch must pass before joining their exclusive club of certified dive watches. I'm not going to go through them all, but I am going to go through the most interesting ones. The first and most obvious feature is the diving time indicator of up to 1 hour, which usually takes the form of a rotating bezel. You just set the 0 on the minute hand at the start of the dive, and then you can see how long you've been down. A diver's bezel must move in only one direction, so that if bumped or accidentally moved, you might read a longer dive time, but never a shorter one. The second feature, which everyone loves even if they never dive in the dark, is lume or backlighting. An ISO certified dive watch must have high readability at 25 centimeters, about 9 inches, in total darkness for 180 minutes. These days, most dive watches use strontium aluminate or some variation of it, with Seiko, Orient, Rolex, and Omega being especially well regarded for their lume. In addition to the lume, there must be some obvious indication that the watch is still running. Usually this is a rectangle or circle of lume on the second hand. Some companies like Ball Watch use radioactive tritium gas tubes which never need charging and always glow. But they have a half-life of 12.3 years, so they have the disadvantage of requiring a dial replacement every 25 years or so if you want to keep the glow. Next, and my personal favorite, shock resistance. The watch must survive being smacked twice with a heavy 3 kilogram hard plastic hammer with an impact velocity of 4.43 meters a second, once on the 9 o'clock side and once directly on the glass, without changing the timekeeping accuracy by more than 60 seconds a day. The actual hammer used in testing is harder and heavier than this one. Having said that, I'm not going to smack my beloved watch with this hammer, so if that's what you've been waiting for, you're out of luck. Next, thermal shock. The watch is tested at minus 20 Celsius, that's minus 4 Fahrenheit, for 1 hour, then placed at room temperature, then warm water temperature, and then checked for condensation. It's also tested in hot 40 Celsius water, which is probably not coincidentally the max recommended temperature for a jacuzzi. Yes, certified dive watches can survive a post-dive jacuzzi soak, though I wouldn't recommend it. Next, chemical resistance. The watch is put into a salt solution with the same density as seawater for 100 hours, without rust or wear. Now, this trial sounds simple, but I can tell you that many budget divers wouldn't pass it. Real dive watches and some of the better snorkeling watches use marine-grade stainless steel, but many don't, especially some of the ones made in China. I know a few dive watch brands where a fingerprint left unattended for a week or two will leave a rust stain. Then, the magnetic resistance test. Encountering a magnetic field, such as might be found on a ship, can dramatically change a watch's timekeeping. Dive watches use one of several tricks to improve their magnetic resistance, such as closing the movement in a soft iron core, a method invented by Germans for their flight watches, or more commonly now by making the hairspring or the watch a combination of anti-magnetic metals or silicone. After being exposed to a magnetic field, the watch must remain accurate to within 30 seconds a day. Next, the won't fall off my wrist while diving test. In this simple test, the watch is pulled apart at the spring bars with 200 newtons of force, about 45 pounds, in opposite directions to ensure it doesn't break and that there's no damage to the lugs or attachment points. And finally, the test everyone knows but everyone misunderstands, the water resistance test. To be certified as a dive watch, the watch must handle a depth of 125 meters at least, which is deeper than most divers will ever go. And if it passes this test, the watch is then rated to 100 meters on the dial. Of course, you can also get certified for deeper. So folks, if you see water resistant 100 meters on the dial, it only means that the watch has been tested to 100 meters of water resistance. But if you see divers 100 meters on the dial, it means the watch has passed both the water resistance test and every other test. That's why a water resistant 200 meters watch may still say not suitable for diving. It only passed the water resistance test, but not all the rest. So why are watches with 50 meters water resistance, like this Timex Expedition, unsuitable for snorkeling? Well, usually it's because of a combination of factors. For example, this particular watch has a pop-on, pop-off caseback, which is not as secure as a screw-down caseback. In addition, this watch has a push-pull crown, which in fact has become loose on this model. A push-pull crown can become snagged on something and become undone, and it requires lubrication to keep it water resistant. With a screw-down crown typical on a diving watch, keeping it lubricated to maintain water resistance is not as important. I should mention, the water resistance test is a static test, which doesn't involve motion. When you're doing water sports or moving in the water, It adds additional pressure to the watch, which can cause it to fail. So, for swimming, it's perfectly fine as long as it's maintained, but for snorkeling, it's a no-go. To get ISO certification and keep it costs money. Many dive watch manufacturers therefore don't bother with ISO standards, either because they don't want to or because they don't have to. Neither Omega nor Rolex, for example, have ISO certification because their dive watches are so well established as excellent quality, they don't need to. The famous and inexpensive Vostok Amphibia wouldn't pass the ISO test because of the bidirectional bezel, and likely the loom isn't good enough either. But they've been using it to dive deep for years and probably couldn't care less about getting it certified, which is itself a rather charming feature. Still other watches, like the Orient Ray II that I reviewed earlier, probably meet most or all of the certifications, including the marine-grade stainless steel. I'm not sure about the second-hand loom, but paying for certification would increase the price, and it's just meant to be a snorkeling and water sports watch anyway. So, does anybody need a certified dive watch? The advantage of buying a certified dive watch is that if you see ISO or divers on the dial, you know that this watch is a tough watch that has passed all the tests necessary to be a diver. If you know watches very well, you know the makes and models that have the same amount of ruggedness and durability without passing the test, and that's fine, you can buy those instead. Just don't buy a Chinese knockoff and seriously expect that it has the same capabilities. Well, thank you for watching. I have links to some of the watches mentioned in this video in the description, so if you're considering purchasing any of these beauties and you'd like to support this channel, please use those links. Otherwise, I will see you in the next video.